Hi, and welcome to another episode of Since You Put It That Way. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Lauder. Today, I'm going to be in conversation with our special guest, Dr. Heather Voorhees. The title of today's podcast is called Clickbait or Cure: How to Spot the Difference Between Good Information, Misinformation, Malinformation, and Disinformation in Health and Medicine. Dr. Heather Voorhees is an associate professor at the University of Montana in Missoula, Montana. Go Grizz! And she's in the Department of Communications. Her bachelor's degree came from Minnesota State University in Moorhead. Her master's in strategic communication from the University of Minnesota in Twin Cities. Her PhD in communication studies at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln, and a postdoctoral fellowship at the Center for Health Communication, University of Texas at Austin. Hook 'em horns, she says. Dr. Voorhees is a researcher, and her projects and publications can be found at her website, www.hvoorhees.com. Let me spell that for you. So www.hvoorhees.com. On her webpage, you'll be able to find out all of her research, videos, and teaching on these important topics. This is called translational research, meaning you take the research that you've done and get it out to people to make a difference. It shouldn't be isolated. She says research should be for the benefit of us all. So that's why she's created her website, and that's what you'll find there. So go search it out, hvoorhees.com. Dr. Voorhees is an associate professor of communication studies at the University of Montana, and her research and teaching focuses on interpersonal health communication, and she's particularly interested in how people communicate regarding the management of illness identity, how individuals seek and offer social support, and how people choose to disclose health-related information. She states that she's a pragmatist, choosing the theory and paradigm based upon the question at hand, and she's a mixed method scholar. She has researched topics such as infertility, mental health, and chronic pain. Before she was in academia, she worked as a small town and suburban newspaper reporter and editor, a magazine editor, a corporate communications manager, and an internal communications consultant. So welcome, Dr. Heather Voorhees, to Since You Put It That Way. This was a great conversation I had with her regarding how to spot the real information online, how to watch out for the bad stuff online. So that's why clickbait or cure. So sit back, enjoy, and listen to our conversation. We're glad that you're here. Welcome, welcome to another episode of Since You Put It That Way. This is the podcast that makes everybody pause and think, hey, let's consider this a different way. Let's think of the same topic differently. So our guest today, I'm hosting Dr. Mary Lauder here. Our guest is Professor Heather Voorhees. Now, did I say that correctly?
Yes, it's a very Dutch name. I married into it, so I don't take personal offense if you
Okay, Voorhees.
It's right,
Yes.
Voorhees.
So there we go. Thank you, Dr. Heather Voorhees. And I met you online at my alma mater, University of Montana.
Correct. Yes,
And
I've been here since 2020, since right in the middle of the pandemic is when I started.
yeah, and you're an associate professor in the Department of Communications.
Correct. Yep.
And then with under that, what's your specialty in that area? What area of communications do you like?
Yeah, so within communication studies, there's different kind of tracks that you can take, and I focus on interpersonal communication, which is how two or three people tend to co-create meaning together. And so even within that, then I specialize in health, interpersonal health communication. So how do we speak with friends, family members, etc., about health and illness, about diagnoses, about symptoms, about things like that. And then even more specific within that context, I look at the context of chronic illness. So incurable but manageable illnesses that tend to affect your daily life and go on for, I believe it's 18 months or more is the current definition of that.
Okay.
So how do we talk about those things to friends and family members?
Yeah, I think that's tremendously interesting because it's very difficult to talk about. And within the context of the doctor-patient relationship, that's very
Yeah,
difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, I think when I ran across your information, actually, I found you in an article. You were quoted in an article in and I can't remember the name of the magazine, and it was just a couple sentences. I'm like, oh, I gotta go find her. Must find her. And and not only just because of the alma mater part about the University of Montana, but just the concept of talking with patients about communication.
Yeah.
The heart of the relationship with I'm going to go doctor to patient. I'm not going to go
Oh,
patient.
yeah,
I'm going to go doctor to patients and
for
say,
sure.
is trust,
Yeah.
is communication, is
Yes.
listening.
Mhm.
And then the other concept of where, maybe the patient becomes their diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's really challenging.
Mhm.
And I think where or the definite or their diagnosis defines them.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
they lose their sense of personhood in that. So
Yes.
in some of the research that you've done, what have you found out with some of those topics relative to like chronic pain or something like that?
Yeah. So I love that you mentioned that. I mean, chronic illnesses obviously are ongoing, sometimes for years, sometimes for decades. And we do often see people being really encumbered by that and really, really making that a key part of their identity. Illness identity is a term that I focus on in my work in interpersonal health communication. And there's various theories that we use to kind of study that. But the concept is we all have an identity, which is a sense of who we are. But that also includes a sense of who other people think we are, right? Because we're influenced by the way people treat us and the way people talk to us and the way that people see us definitely influences how we see ourselves.
Yes.
So, illness identity is this concept of how do we weave in an illness or a disability, and in particular, in my case, I study chronic illness identity, but how do we weave that into a sense of who I am, how I may have changed since before that diagnosis or that oncoming of symptoms? What are my expectations for myself going forward? Because chronic illness can change that. And then also, how does this change the way that I relate to other people and the way that they relate to me? So, in my work, so for example, you mentioned chronic pain, that's one of the contexts that I've studied. What I found is that as people start to feel these symptoms of chronic pain, maybe they're diagnosed, maybe they're not, maybe they know the cause of the pain, maybe they don't. But obviously, being in pain every day changes who you see yourself to be, right? It changes the capabilities that you feel that you have. It changes the activities you're able to do. It changes the way you're able to show up in the world. But importantly, too, it changes the way that other people see and treat you.
Mhm.
So, what I've found is that sometimes, kind of think of it as a spectrum. On the one end, we have people who have experienced chronic pain who say all of a sudden people in my life treat me like a baby. They treat me like I can't do anything, that I constantly just need this attention, that, they stop inviting me places because they assume that I won't be able to go. And on the other end of the spectrum, you get people who say, well, all of a sudden people started thinking that I was faking it. And they started treating me rougher. And they started saying, oh, you're tired. Well, could you just try to get out of bed for me this one time? Right? So you have these kind of two extremes of the way that this chronic pain influences how other people see you.
Yeah.
And then that changes the way that you see yourself, very much so. So, yeah, I mean, to me, interpersonal communication is relationship. It's, again,
Yes.
that co creating of meaning. And so the way that I feel about myself doesn't necessarily jive with the way that you feel about me. So, how do we talk about that? How do we physically move in that space and co create that meaning together? Right?
Right. Now, have you been able to take the findings that you've had into any training for professionals, physicians, physician assistants, nurse practitioners, any
Yeah,
recommendations?
I'm a huge, huge, huge believer in translational research, right? One thing, so a thing you should know about me is this is my third career.
Yeah.
I came to academics at the ripe old age of 35.
Yeah.
But before then, I was a newspaper reporter. I worked in internal communications for a healthcare system. So I've seen communication and I've seen its different forms and I've seen all that. What really excited me about academia is the ability to access and to build on all of this research.
Yeah.
I think most people don't have access to all the amazing research pieces that are out there. And it's so, I'm so fortunate to be able to read all of these great works from all of these great minds and to use
Yeah.
them in my own research and build off of them. But what really upsets me is that people don't have access to this research.
Right.
I really believe in translational research. I really believe in applied research. It really upsets me when all of this knowledge is held up here away from people who would find it valuable and who could use it and who should be trusted to read it and to engage with it. So, yes, I try my best to bring things that I've learned and things that I've researched to everyone. So, to that end, I do a lot of community work. I did a talk about health misinformation to our ongoing lifelong learning program here in Montana. And I had an audience of 100 people who just wanted to learn about what misinformation is and how they can look for it in their own lives. And that was awesome.
Yeah.
Um, I always bring research down into my classroom for my undergraduates and my graduate students. Research is not scary. Let's learn how to read this. Let's learn how to use it. Let's learn how
Right.
to argue with it, right? But yeah, I think to your point originally, and I strayed a little bit from that.
Oh, good.
But I think it's really important too for communication scholars to bring our work to medical professionals
Yes.
because I can study this all I want, but I am not an MD. And I want to share what I've learned with MDs, and I want MDs and other, practicing healthcare professionals.
Yeah.
I want them to be able to share what they know with me. And then I also want patient voices in there. So to me, it seems like we should all be working together because we're all specializing in different things. So one of the things that I was really excited about is when I was a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Health Communication at UT Austin, Hookham,
Yeah.
uh, we were able to. One of my main projects was I worked on a white paper and actually some free curriculum for professors of journalism and for medical professionals, future medical professionals, on how to teach people how to talk about mental health and mental illness in non-stigmatizing ways. Which now, as you know, in the past 5 years, mental health is front and center, and I'm all about it.
Yeah. Exactly.
But we still talk about it in some ways that we could improve, in some ways that maybe stigmatize certain people and leave certain people out of the conversation. So I created this curriculum for them to use in the classroom. It's available for free. It's still up online. Anyone can go view it. You can use it wherever you want if you want. But we were also able to publish in some journals that specifically are targeted toward educators and future healthcare providers on here are some quick and easy things that you can do with your students, your future professionals, on
Yes.
how ways we can practice that non-stigmatizing language, ways we can practice thinking about these patients in a slightly different way to really, like you said, build that trust and build that empathy and open up those lines of communication. So
Yeah.
I try to put my research everywhere I can possibly go.
Right. So yeah, and so that was one thing I noted too. So folks look at so so basically Google Dr. Dr. Heather Voorhees, and you're gonna find Google Scholar, you're gonna find her articles, you're gonna find the information. It's right there. It just popped right up. There's a bunch of articles and research that you've done that is, right there. And I think to that point of how important and accessible your research is and how actually accessible you are. Your students' reviews, by the way, are quite good. I saw some of those online too. And very good teacher, very good instructor, really reaches out, really works with the students. And so I'm like, okay, like this is the whole package, not just research, but teaching about that. So yes, this is the real thing. But I think to that point, because patients come to me and they say, oh, I've done my research. And I'm like, oh, interesting. So do you know how to research? The answer, of course, unfortunately, is not always,
Yeah.
and typically not much. But they're looking for answers.
Oh
And that's
yeah.
what I hear in that statement. They're
Yes.
looking and trying to advocate. And so they're going to bump into, which really is our topic today, which I'm so excited to get to because that was a bit of a prelude. But here we go into misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, the dismiss and mals of all the information that people run into online,
Yeah.
in the literature, in our culture, and how do we navigate that? I mean, you
Yeah.
teach a course on that. and there's certain principles to really learn about this. And when I looked at some of the information behind this, there were some things that were surprising about this.
Yeah.
And I'll get to that, but I want to really hear from you, your part about this misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. We should probably start with definitions of those, because I think people will find those definitions interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I certainly did.
Yes, yes.
So
I
yeah,
did too. I did too. I was like, oh, I didn't
oh,
know.
we categorize, scholars like to categorize everything.
Yeah,
So I always start every undergrad class too on let's all agree on our terms here. So there's a lot of words that we all use that we don't necessarily agree on what they mean. So let's ground set here. Let's level set.
yeah.
So yeah, so to your point, there's three kind of I call them flavors of misinformation. So one, there's misinformation, and that's the term we've all heard. Misinformation, think of that as kind of the most innocuous, the most innocent form of misinformation. So that's information that is inaccurate and not necessarily reliable, but it's spread with good intentions, right? The sender does not necessarily know that it is incorrect, and they are sharing this in good intent. So think about maybe a relative knows that you are really struggling with rheumatoid arthritis. And so they forward you a headline that they saw on Facebook. You know, boiled lemon juice cures rheumatoid arthritis, right? Now, that is not correct, but it was sent in the spirit of helping. And presumably, the person who loves you did not know it was incorrect, right?
Right.
So, misinformation it's not harmless, but it's definitely not malicious, okay? So then, kind of in the middle ground, we're moving up a little bit. We have what we call malinformation. And this is information that starts with a kernel of truth, but is intentionally exaggerated in a way that is misleading and therefore causes potential harm. So think about, and this one fools me all the time. So think about when you see like a headline of something of, you know, 1,400 people poisoned by bad milk outbreak. Oh my God. Oh no. And so someone spreads that headline and it shows up on your Facebook or your Instagram feed. Okay, well, maybe that was true, but maybe the headline is from 10 years ago. And the person that, created that little meme or whatever knew that. And they knew it was outdated information. And they were using that headline as a way to kind of shock you or scare you, typically into buying something or believing something or kind of getting on their side, right?
Yeah.
So again, it stems from that truth, but it's intentionally exaggerated.
Okay.
So that's malinformation. On the top of the spectrum here, we have disinformation. This is public enemy number one. Disinformation is inaccurate information that is deliberately propagated in order to fool you. So it might not even stem from the truth. It might be completely made up. And the person who is spreading it and sharing it is doing it to try to manipulate you. Okay. So this is really dangerous because this is when people just straight up lie to you. And they're doing it to scare you or to confuse you because fear and confusion make you vulnerable to whatever solution, quote unquote, that person is also probably trying to package with that scary piece of information. So, misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, they all have slightly different outcomes. None of them are great. But think about the intentionality behind it, is how I can kind of tell the difference.
Yeah. I think that I love that you really emphasize the intentionality, because that is, I saw also the key difference between those
Yeah.
levels of information. And we have a lot of that right now.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of it. I saw some examples of that even from the 1400s. Where,
Oh, 100% in the class that I teach, and every time I take every time I talk about this, I want to remind people this is not a new phenomenon. This has been happening. I mean, the history of snake oil salesmen, right? Snake oil salesman, we know that term. That kind of means someone who's trying to sell you a false treatment, a false remedy, right? That was started in the 1800s in the Wild West when people were literally selling things they called snake oil.
yeah.
Fun fact: snake oil is a real thing. It's an actual. It's a Chinese balm made from the oil of a certain type of snake.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it's an actual thing. And
Yeah.
so when a lot of the Chinese immigrants came over to California to, basically build California, they brought this ancient treatment with them. And native white Californians saw this and they thought, how exotic, how exciting. And so they started just bottling whatever they wanted and calling it snake oil and going from town to town to town and promising this, time honored healing tradition. And
Yes.
it was completely just captured from it. There were no snakes. In the original snake oil there was, but in the snake oil we're familiar with, there is not. So
Fascinating.
yeah, so this has been going on for a long, long time.
Yeah. And then if you throw in the placebo effect,
Yes.
which is 30%, that no matter what you do, you tell them that
Yeah.
this is going to work, you get 30% cure
Yeah.
rate, kill rate. That's actually pretty good. So that gave some, unfortunately, inappropriate credibility to the snake oil salesman.
Yes.
And then if you actually, there's the hyper placebo effect, which you can get 45 to even 60% of recovery. So
Wow.
by people really buying into it, and the language and intent around which it is presented and the credibility of the individual. So you could get this maximum effect of something that is really truly snake oil that doesn't have snake oil in it.
Placebo effect gets a bad rap too. I buddies with the placebo effect. I'm okay with him, right? Because
Placebo.
I'm okay with it. I mean, if you want to go to, I don't know, hot backwards yoga 4 hours every day of your, that's fine. If that makes you feel better, that's great, right? If it works for you, that's amazing. The problem I have is when people are trying to suddenly exploit that for their own personal gain that is exorbitant, right? Like if something makes you feel better, that's fine. There's absolute merit in that. But if it is actively hurting you instead, and maybe you can't tell that it hurts you, maybe it makes you feel better at first, but in the long term, it's bad for you, and someone knows that, and they're intentionally selling that to you, knowing that it's probably not a good idea, that's where I have problems with it.
Right. And again, that gets back to the intent of it, doesn't it? The intent
Right.
of the individual. So where's our biggest hot button for disinformation right now?
Oh my goodness. This
You're
feels like
welcome.
this feels like a trap. This feels like a trick question.
You're welcome.
I've thought about this a lot, and I don't. What I want to stress to people is human beings and individuals, we have an obligation to ourselves, and we have a responsibility to everyone else in society to do our homework and to think critically about things and to always give everything a second thought, right? Like the title of your podcast, the intent of your podcast is never take anything at face value.
Right.
Hard stop. Always give everything a second thought.
Yep.
We as individuals have an obligation to do that. However, the last thing I want to do is demonize someone who has believed a piece of mal, or disinformation because someone they trusted told them that, right? Because I think we often place the onus on the people who fell for the lie instead of the liar that spread it. Mm-hmm. And I always tell people I am not here to shame anyone who has paid $60 for a bottle of supplements that ended up not doing anything, or who put their trust in someone who sounded like they knew what they were talking about and seemed to have their best interests at heart. I fall for misinformation as much as anyone. Honestly, I do. We need to stop blaming the victim, and we need to start blaming the people who are intentionally spreading this mal and misinformation and start holding them accountable. And I think the problem is there's just so many people spreading mal and misinformation. And it's really, really hard to know who to trust.
It is. And I think, one of the things too, in understanding how this gets propagated, and it's not an individual that per se gets something wrong or gets something misunderstood, but it works through how humans learn, which is through a group, a network, because
Yes.
social learners, right?
Yes.
So humans are social learners. So you're going to run in the pack that feels comfortable to you because it feels comfortable.
Yeah.
And if you get into this pack and all of a sudden you get other information given to you, or you begin to, since you put it that way, consider something else, it becomes uncomfortable to try and get out of that pack.
Yeah, right. I mean, have you taken my class? Because these are all things
No.
that I discuss in my class. Yeah,
No.
I mean, we talk about human nature, and humans are pack animals, and we are built to trust one another and to find our tribe and to trust those people. We are also built, and I think rightfully so, to trust people in seats of authority and
Yes.
people that we have given that power, right? So we as a society have said, here is our medical system. Here's what it takes for you to get, an MD or a DDS or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you follow those things, then we trust you to
Right.
have the patient's best interest at heart. We trust those people.
Right.
Unfortunately, having an advanced medical degree does not mean that you are not capable of spreading mal and disinformation, right? Think of pandemic. But that was a lie. I feel pretty secure going on record saying that that was a lie, and it was propagated by someone who was in a position of trust. And
Yes.
one of the things that was made very, very clear to me during the pandemic and afterwards uh, was this idea of, if you have someone who is supposed to be the smartest, most respected, most trusted person in the room telling you to drink bleach to stay healthy, I don't for one second blame someone who trusted that person and who did that. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you trust that person?
Right.
So that's why we all have an obligation to do our due diligence, but at the end of the day, it's not the victim that's wrong, it's the liar that's wrong. And so we as a society need to start learning where to point those fingers, and we need some mechanisms on how to hold people accountable, which we don't have right now.
That's very fair, because, and it looks like even more, unfortunately, in 2025, the guardrails are coming off.
Yes, right. We as a society are saying everyone's truth is exactly as fair and equal as everyone else's truth, and everyone is capable of being an authority, and we're kind of losing our sense of who is trained and who has the right knowledge and know-how and who should be trusted. And trust is not created equal.
Yeah.
We shouldn't trust everyone the same amount. You just shouldn't.
No. So if we wander over to social media and poke at influencers, and when I mean poke at them, I mean expose them, open them up.
Yeah.
We've got people who literally are saying things that are untrue, and they're literally going unchecked.
Yes.
And if you look at the world of what's called affiliate marketing, what that means, affiliate marketing means you hire someone to sell your product. Okay, that could be through Amazon, that could be through Alibaba, that could be through just your own website, Shopify, anything. You just have a network of people who are disseminating and selling your product. In that situation, the affiliates are like the middleman. We would call them middlemen. Yeah, it's exactly what they function in. Now, men in terms of the gender, it's neutral, middle people, right? So that person then is taking a message, and they're going out to try and sell as much, because it's all about the dollar.
Right.
Then they've got a product, however, that doesn't really work, or it might cause a little bit of harm over time. So how do we put the guardrails back on, and who gets to put the guardrails back on in our society about that?
Yeah. And that's where I really struggle, because my goal is to give people the information that they need to identify mis, mal, and disinformation.
Yeah.
To give them the tools that they need to then critically assess it, to give them the confidence that they're able to even do that.
Yeah.
And to make them into good consumers. But again, I'm not putting all that responsibility on consumers, because there are some really, really convincing liars out there.
There are.
And we all do. Oh my God, I've taken so many vitamins and supplements that I'm pretty sure did absolutely nothing.
Well, to that, I'll say you should try mine then, because they work.
Deal for you.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not a matter of being dumb or smart. It's not a matter of that.
Right.
It's a matter of kind of To your point, think I don't think we have enough regulation, quite honestly. I mean, of the industry and of the information industry, because information is a commodity, and
Yes, it is.
um, there's power in being able to be in
Yeah.
control of that information and to having the channel to disseminate it. And with great power comes great responsibility. And not all people use that responsibility. And right now, we just don't, not just social media, but I mean all information. We don't have a way as a society to hold these folks accountable. I mean, think about, and you know this, think about the supplement industry. Unregulated,
Mhm,
hard stop, unregulated.
mhm.
Fun fact, the marketing of your supplement, whatever you make, is more regulated than what's actually in it. There are more laws that tell you what you can and cannot say on the bottle of your product than there are about what you can and cannot put in the product itself when it comes to vitamins and supplements, because they are not considered food and they're not covered under FDA or USDA regulations. So it's still the Wild West.
Yeah.
It's still the Wild West.
Yeah. I didn't know that. I did not
Yeah.
know that. That's fascinating.
Yep.
And literally I'm at a marketing conference right now.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah. And yesterday was the power of your story. And I'm like, well, okay. And they said the product can be okay, but your story is what's going to sell it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, wait a minute. No, the product's got to be good.
You know, raise your hand. Wait a second. Shouldn't the product be better?
I know. And so talking with people, I've said things like, because you always have your elevator speech ready at a convention like this, at a conference like this, right? Why are you here? And then I said, well, because it works. And they just kind of look at me. And so, because that's what I would say as a physician. Now, when I help my patients pick the right supplements through my office, which I do, and if you go on my website, there are a list of supplements that I put my name on. Why? Because I vetted those.
Right.
When it says 250 milligrams or 500 milligrams of vitamin C, that's what it's got in it. When and when I say it's got these purity aspects and it's curated and then we found the best, that's great.
Yeah.
Because I can take those doses and use for patients to supply the nutritional support they need as a supplement.
Yeah.
And again, it's a supplement, right?
And it's really tricky too, because I do believe in the power of, I would love to see us get back to more homeopathic, more natural. Like let's use what the earth is giving us. I am all about that.
Yeah.
But you have these bad actors who are putting, just literal talcum powder and rat poison in capsule form and slapping a label on it. And now, someone's going to have a bad reaction to that and they're going to think, well, all supplements are garbage. That's not true. That's not true.
That's right.
But there's so much noise out there that it's so difficult to tell the difference between, what is valid and what is just a marketing line.
Right. And because it's you're right, unregulated, it's
Yes, it's bonkers to me. And I understand why. I mean, the FDA does not have the capacity to regulate this stuff. And especially now in 2025,
yeah,
they're certainly going to have limited capacity. So here, let me give you a little cheat sheet when it comes to, especially talking about marketing and talking about, how to kind of identify some snake oil salesmen. So there's three main features of health mal, and disinformation. Okay. So if you ever presented with something and you want a quick and dirty process of deciding, can I believe this or not? Number
yes.
one, it's typically negative in nature. So we're always going to try to tell you that something is wrong with you, that you could be better, that something in the environment is hurting you, that there is some problem. We are creating a problem, okay? Because as we know, when we are afraid, when we are confused, when we feel uncertain, our brain literally works differently. Synapses fire differently when
Yes.
we experience different emotions. And so when we're scared and confused, we leave more openings for information to seep through. We're less critical of information because that fear and that confusion takes over. So health and mal and disinformation typically is going to be negative in nature. Okay.
Okay.
Two, typically, as you said, it's going to use personal narratives or personal stories. We're going to try to personalize this.
Yeah.
You'll see a lot of influencers, a lot of marketers saying, I was just like you, blah, 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 blah. Here's how it helped me. Or you'll see a website with a ton of different, personal testimonials on there. Or, so and so's cousin tried this and she had the best, blah, blah, blah. We're always going to try to make it personal. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, right? Because again, we're human beings and we learn as pack animals, we learn to trust. But misinformation sinks in better
Mhm.
if other people are vouching for it. Okay. And then number three, they're typically going to sneak an anti-science message in there. So a lot of times we'll see this in doctors don't want you to know, or beat the system with this one simple trick. We're going to try to break down trust in another system in order to make our system look better and look more credible.
Um,
So taken taken individually, these are just marketing tricks, and there's nothing inherently wrong with these tricks. But when you see something that uses all three of these tactics together,
yeah.
or a product or a service that is asking for your money or your attention or your time, that's when you should start going, maybe I should look into this a little bit more, and maybe I shouldn't just take it on face value.
Yeah. Those tips are amazing, especially that last one, because you're tearing down a system of trust that's already there.
Right.
Yeah. Which is, that's to me, in my mind as a physician, that's key because we see where people give testimony. I did I did a testimonial of a patient who is a patient, and she said, all of her friends come to see me, and they sat around one evening, and they all had sort of similar diagnoses, but they all had different treatments,
Mhm.
and the only common denominator was me.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so, well, because I use genomics,
Yeah, yeah,
and so we're really putting things together based upon their genome.
yeah.
And
Right.
I think that was beautiful and that was wonderful. And that exactly points to why. So unless the person's doing genomics, you're right. There it's going to be, the common denominator shouldn't be them. So, okay. So then I'm thinking of patients buying into some things, trying some things because they're looking for answers.
For sure.
And then we're thinking of communication. So if we put that together, the patient's afraid often to tell the physician that they're taking something.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
And and maybe what they're taking could be based upon just, malinformation somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And or, their card club, their running club, their whatever, soccer moms, whatever, gym dads, whatever, said
Mhm.
this was a good idea. That seemed, and it's always going to be, seemed like a good idea at the time, might
Yeah.
have even seemed a little too good to be true, but yet I was desperate.
Yeah.
So, what do you say to the folks about disclosure to their physician,
Mhm.
to their MD or their DO, and say, hey, I'm taking this, I want you to know about it. But then, on the other hand, so this is a little complex question, they get slammed by that physician for
Right.
taking stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
I at least once a semester I will ask all of my classes, raise a hands, who here lies to their doctor? And my hand is up.
I
I
do.
know you as it's
I'm a
you
doctor and I've lied to my doctor.
say you as a doctor probably don't like hearing that, but you probably understand,
We all, yes, yes, we do understand that.
right? Yeah, I we all do it for various reasons. I'm not proud, but we all do it.
I don't.
And I think that's it, it's human nature, and I understand that. And look, I am not here to tell anyone to not try new things, right? Like if you, all my point is I want you to just think really critically and really carefully about why you're trying it and why you trust it. And if you really carefully thought through it, it's going to be easier to talk to your provider about it
Yeah,
because you're going to see your provider as just one more piece of your quote research, right? If you truly believe in a supplement or an exercise or a diet or whatever, and you've looked and tried to read all you can possibly read on it, and you've read the critics and you've taken what they have to say into account as well, and you've done your best trying to vet it and you still think it's worthwhile, consider your provider as one last piece of information, one last resource. Does my provider think this is a good idea? Maybe they've never heard of it before. Maybe they go, yeah, okay, try it. Maybe they say, well, for someone your age, when you're contraindications, maybe we should back off a little bit. But see your provider as one more piece of evidence, right? One more piece of the puzzle, because they often have, again, resources and experience that you might not find elsewhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a risk that your provider might be a big meanie and might yell at you and say, what are you doing?
Yeah. And then you just need to find a new one.
And you go find a doctor.
And honestly, those people wander into my office all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, they go, well, I'm just tired of being, whatever, marginalized, ignored, not able to try things, and there are things that too, I see things that patients, I'm like, I'm not sure I would agree with that. What I have them do, and this is interesting, I have them bring in all the stuff they're taking.
Yeah. Yeah.
The bag. I said, let me look at it.
Yeah.
And then I explain to them why this is good, why this isn't good. And if someone's done a really, really good job, I said, hey, you nailed this. This is awesome.
Awesome.
And the other folks, I'm like, well, here's where I see where you were going and I understand why you were going that way. You might want to consider a different way.
Yeah. Or, what I really love too is like when I've talked to a provider about a vitamin supplement or whatever, and they'll say, well, actually, you don't really need that because you're already getting that in this thing. And I'm like, oh my God, you just saved me $35 a month.
Yeah, that happens too. Yeah. And it has taken me years to understand this whole, aspect. I mean, I was trained in pharmacology, right? And I had a little lady bring in a grocery bag, dump things up on the table and say, you're going to have to help me figure this out. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that was, a year into my practice in the mid 90s. And I still, 25, 30 years later, I'm still learning all the time.
Yeah.
And so, looking at how does industry, if we go back to this mal, and misinformation, how does industry perpetuate this? I'm thinking of things like, well, we'll hit the hot buttons, the tobacco industry, how, that was shaped with, changing the messaging, all the doctors were smoking Camels in the 50s and 60s. And then they found the research that said, hey, this actually cigarettes aren't dangerous, but yet there's a whole other body of research that showed how dangerous cigarettes were.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and we certainly, I mean, that could be a whole 100-hour podcast on its own. Yeah. But I think it's fascinating when you start looking into the way that social systems influence the smallest decisions in our lives. So one of the things I like to teach my undergrads, this is such a fun unit, is we look at government oversight and FDA, USDA, who kind of controls what can't they do, what powers they have, et cetera, et cetera. And we talk about the food pyramid, good old food pyramid, right? Yeah. We all grew up with various forms of the food pyramid.
Yeah.
Now it's my plate. When I grew up, it was the actual pyramid.
Yes, right.
And if you recall, it was the bottom of the pyramid. Do you remember what the bottom of the pyramid was?
Wasn't it grains?
It was grains. And do you remember how many servings you were supposed to have of grains?
I'm thinking 5 to 6, but I'm guessing
6 to 11 servings of grains. Okay. Woo. So if you start looking at the food pyramid, it's just something we grew up with. It's just something that was everywhere. It's something everyone was familiar with. You just kind of take it for granted. But if you start to look at the history of where that came from,
yes,
it started out in, I believe, World War II is when the government really started getting serious about giving nutrition information to society as a whole, because we were going through war and there were shortages and people, were facing starvation. And so the government said, hold on, we need to help people. We need to give them some advice on what to eat every day. My favorite illustration is the first ever, quote, food pyramid. It was called something like the Big Seven, and it was a wheel, and it had 7 little sections, right? And one of them was like meats, and one was, breads or whatever. Butter had its own section.
Still should. We all We honor butter.
Eat that butter, right? So and at the bottom it had a little disclaimer and it said something like, um, when given the chance, eat any and all of these in as many quantities as you can. Basically, it was saying like, eat whatever you can find because we were in a time of shortage, right? So that's where we kind of started this idea of the government giving us insight into what we should be eating. Well, if you kind of follow the history, then, well, what happened in America? Well, then, farming, agriculture really took over after the war. What happened then? Well, now we have all this dairy, we have all this wheat, we have all these legumes that are being produced, and people just aren't interested in them. But what if the government tells them to be interested in it?
Right.
So the government would create and they would update these rules or guidelines on what to eat that were based largely on the subsidized crops that the government had too much of at the time.
That's right.
That's why you get the government telling you you need to eat 5 servings of red meat every day or whatever, right? Because they had a bunch of cattle farmers who had a bunch of products, and it was in everyone's best interest for those products to move.
Right.
So yada yada yada, you get to where you're at.
Those products to move.
Wow. Right? Wow. You didn't even hesitate. You jumped. I just fed that to you. You snapped it right up.
Gotcha. Utter nonsense. Moving right along. Yes. So, okay. So does that fall under one of the three? Is that malinformation? I mean, there's some intent there.
You could argue that. And I would entertain a healthy debate that would be, because it stems from the truth, right? We should have a balanced diet 100%.
Right.
But the point here is that the thing that we trust, the thing from the government that we supposedly trust, that we supposedly elect, that supposedly has our best interests in mind, that we just take for granted. There are so many machinations going on behind the scenes that we are not aware of that influence what that looks like. And so again, think critically. I don't want to start a revolution here. I don't think people should be in the streets. But I do think, to your point, industry and government have so much control over what research gets out where, what recommendations get out where, who gets funded, what type of things are hot in the news, and what types of things are completely forgotten. And we don't necessarily know that because who looks into this, right? I get paid to look into this, but like, who has time to sit and fact check and debunk things that people who they trust are telling them?
Right. Yeah. And then you do have experts telling them where, now we have a lot of physicians, and I'm one of those in that space of communication, right? And one of the things that I struggle with in this space is all these things that we've talked about today and coming from the intent of it.
Yeah.
And honestly, my integrity has gotten me in trouble more than doing things wrong, right? So what I mean is I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that, or no, I, call foul, or no, that smells funny, that looks funny. And they're like, who are you? Get out of here. So I've been kicked out of places because I raise a flag. Right?
Yeah.
And not in a way that was anything other than, hey, this doesn't look right.
Right.
Wasn't a revolution. And so in this space, my intent is to have the best curated information possible, that the information put forward and the guests we have integrity, that the information has integrity. It can be backed up. It can be found. It can be transparent. It doesn't have things tied to it.
Well, and anything that is worth listening to is able to be and encourages questioning, right? I always tell my students, this is me, this is my perspective. You don't have to believe me. Just because I'm standing up here with the PowerPoint and you're sitting down there taking notes doesn't mean that you have to take every single word I say. Question me. And so it's really fun in my health misinformation class, especially because I encourage them to be critics, right?
Yeah.
This last semester when I taught it, I had one student who would Google fact check almost everything I said. And it was amazing because I'd say something like, America and New Zealand are the only countries that still allow blah, blah, blah. And he's like, actually, New Zealand just added that last year. So, like, he was always fact checking me. And I was like, yes, this is what we should all be doing. Because to your point, if something has merit, if something is valuable, if something has credence, you should be able to question it. And if someone says, that's stupid, shut up, just try it and you'll like it, wrong, red flag. If someone gets mad at you because you are asking to see evidence of something's efficacy, red flag. If someone is saying, well, I don't want to engage in blah, 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 red flag. You should be able to question these things.
Yeah.
And, experts aren't always right. I'm wrong sometimes. I'm willing to admit that. But we learn together. And I'm not afraid to be questioned because if I'm wrong, I want to know and I want to correct it.
Yeah.
And if it takes someone, questioning me and standing up to me for me to correct the record, then so be it. It's face threatening, but I'm willing to do that because I want to be accurate. I want to be correct.
Yeah. And really what that is, instead of wanting to be right, you want to get it right.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And so I think really in looking at this and listening to ourselves today, I appreciate the clarity on what folks can look for. I appreciate the clarity on the tools that you've given so people can know what to look for when they see the three things, the testimony, the knocking down of one system to promote their system. And then the third one was, what was the third one? There was the third one in there. Do you remember
I mean, everything I said was amazing, so it's hard for me to.
There's those 3 tools. You said the three, like here, let me give your folks these 3 things. So it was the testimony. Oh, it had the flavor of science, but not really the full science.
Oh, yes, an anti-science bent. Yes,
Anti-science
yes.
message. So, and I saw that too. I heard that, and I also thought of the anti-science message being of almost science, but the pseudoscience of it.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's important for me to reiterate that so much of health and well-being and medicine is still just a big the body is very complicated. The human body is a beautiful mess, and there is so much that we don't know about it. So look, the miracle cures are still out there. They are. The things that will cure Alzheimer's, they're out there. The things that will improve cancer survival rates, it's out there. So I want to encourage people to try new things and to look into new ideas. I'm never going to say, everything new is terrible. No, 100%. That's not it. Because the point of science is to disprove itself. The point of science is to take what we thought we knew and to test it and to retest it and to retest it and to figure out if that's actually true or if we need to adjust. So a lot of times you'll get these stories of like, this just in, researchers learn that coffee now causes cancer instead of curing cancer. And you think, well, those stupid idiots, they didn't know. They've been telling me for something. They don't know what they're talking about. They just, they were just proven wrong. That's what science is. Yeah. That's the job of science, is to constantly be reevaluating what we think we know. So go out there, try new things, look into new stuff, try new treatments, consider new therapies. That's great. But do your homework, question everything, and get as much information as you can. Use your resources, and your providers are resources.
Yes.
So use them, right? Ask questions and think critically.
Good. And I will throw in there, listen to our podcast since you put
sure.
it. Get your genome done so you know you and you know your story and your journey so you can follow you and not recreate the wheel and work with who you are.
Right. Genomics are so cool. That is such a cool field. It's so neat.
I mean, it's just really fun to allow them to follow their own story.
Yeah.
Things that fit for them. So then is much less misinformation because it's them.
Right.
So it's wonderful. Well, you have just really enlightened me on some good things on the information world and where we are and how to, enhance the doctor-patient relationship and how to, I feel in a good way challenged to let people question me more I mean, they do question me a lot and I spend a lot of time, but sometimes I'm like, well, you could just trust me on that one. But I, because I have done the work and
Yeah.
I have provided things with integrity, but it challenges me to even be a little more open about that. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think too much questioning, quote unquote, is better than not enough questioning, quite honestly.
Okay, well, then I'll have you do the scheduling and do the follow.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Well, thank you very much for being our guest on Since You Put It That Way. And we'll post in the information for people how to follow you and look you up at the University of Montana there and see more of your research and see the projects you're doing because it's really important work that you're doing. And thank you for making it translatable to us,
Yeah. Thank you
consumers. Yeah.
absolutely for having me. And I have a website where you can read a lot of my stuff, a lot of my research I post for free.
Yes.
It's hvoorhees.com. Two O's, two E's, hvoorhees.com.
Okay. And we will post that in the
Yeah.
information.
And all the research that I've authored or co-authored, I like to put up there. You can download all the PDFs. You can watch a bunch of my online lectures for free. There's a lot of stuff. I try to make everything I possibly do available to as many people as I can. So thank you for letting me come on here and share my message. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. You're very welcome. And folks, we will see you next time on our next episode of Since You Put It That Way. In the meantime, go out, be well, be healthy, enjoy. Thank you for joining us on the Since You Put It That Way podcast. Today's episode was written and produced by Crowded Table Productions. Technical editing, Malin Long Lopes. Sound editing, Jonathan Fiegel. Music, The River Jordan, written and performed by May Erlewine. Please rate and review our podcast as well. We appreciate your feedback and hey, be positive, share the love.